Hello, welcome. This is, of course, Novara Live. My name is, of course, Aaron Bastani. And, of course, I'm joined by Kieran and Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
Mr. Bastani, it has been a minute. I'm doing fine. How are you? I've missed you. Other than that, I've been doing well. How about yourself?
Well, it's nice to hear somebody misses me. I don't hear that from my wife. I certainly don't hear it from my colleagues here at Novara Media. I'm just joking. I missed you too, Kieran. Lovely weather. Certainly doesn't hurt. We have a great show coming up tonight. Some really interesting stories. There is new extinction-level polling for the Tories. You thought it couldn't get worse, but maybe it can. The wife of a Tory councillor's appeal has been denied. That's in regard to a very high-profile racist tweet. Stay tuned for all of that and more. As ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up to become a supporter of Novara Media at novaramedia.com/support. After 19 months of slaughter in the besieged Gaza Strip, the UK, France, and Canada are finally taking a stand over Israel's genocide. The three countries released a joint statement on Monday, threatening Israel with sanctions for its blocking of food, water, and medicine from the civilian population of Gaza. Here's an excerpt from that statement. "We will not stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in response. We oppose any attempt to expand settlements in the West Bank. Israel must halt settlements which are illegal and undermine the viability of a Palestinian state and the security of both Israelis and Palestinians. We will not hesitate to take further action, including targeted sanctions." The BBC's Jeremy Bowen has described this as the three countries' strongest condemnation yet of the way Israel is fighting the war in Gaza. It is utterly extraordinary. And Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich responded to the statement in a post on X. This is what Smotrich had to say. Yesterday, the leaders of France, the UK, and Canada morally aligned themselves with a terrorist organization. They really don't do sober analysis, do they? Some people in the Israeli government. That raped, slaughtered, murdered, and burned women, babies, and children, and that repeatedly declares its goal to destroy the state of Israel. They've gone so far as to seek to reward terrorism by granting it a state. Of course, the Israeli state was founded after years of a terrorist campaign. Anyway, Israel will not bow its head before this moral hypocrisy, anti-Semitism, and one-sidedness. So now Britain, France, and Canada are anti-Semitic as well. It doesn't stop, does it? It will continue its just and moral war until Hamas is destroyed, the hostages are returned, and the threat from the Gaza Strip to Israeli citizens is eliminated. Israel will never agree to the establishment of a terrorist state in its midst that would endanger its existence and threaten the future of the Jewish people and their one and only state. Where do you start and where do you end? And where does it end? We can talk more in a moment with Kieran in regards to perhaps the terrorist origins of Israel, Likud, the Lehi, the Stern Gang. But back to the present moment, Prime Minister Keir Starmer used what were perhaps his strongest words yet for Israel's actions since the beginning of this genocidal war on Gaza in the House of Commons today.
I want to put on record today that we're horrified by the escalation from Israel. We repeat our demand for a ceasefire as the only way to free the hostages. We repeat our opposition to settlements in the West Bank. And we repeat our demand to massively scale up humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The recent announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza, a basic quantity, is totally and utterly inadequate. Yeah. So we must coordinate our response because this war has gone on for far too long. We cannot allow the people of Gaza to starve.
That comes after a noticeable shift in tone from many UK media outlets, including the BBC, and a raft of front pages highlighting the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza over the last week. The civilian population of Gaza is facing a credible risk of famine because Israel enforced an 11-week blockade of the Strip. Food, water, and medicine had been withheld from Gazans since the 2nd of March, leading to the devastating images of emaciated babies and children. In response to European condemnation, Israel said it had let 5 aid trucks into Gaza yesterday. A reminder that is for approximately 2 million people. 5 aid trucks is 100th of the pre-war average of import trucks, according to the United Nations. As you can see in this graphic, which is now on screen, it's a tiny fraction of what is needed. Here's what Tom Fletcher, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs at the UN, told the Today programme this morning.
The situation is dire. The real test of the words will be whether we can get that aid in. We are there on the border right now. We have thousands of trucks ready to go. We know how to do this. We've done it before. And we are demanding that the world back us in pushing Israel to let us get in and reach those people who are starving right now.
And yesterday it was five trucks of aid that went in, not fit for purpose in this case.
No, that's a drop in the ocean. And let's be clear, those 5 trucks are just sat on the other side of the border right now. They've not reached the communities they need to reach. And, let me describe what is on those trucks. This is baby food, baby nutrition. There are 14,000 babies that will die in the next 48 hours unless we can reach them. This is not food that Hamas are going to steal. No, we run the risk of looting. We run the risks of being hit as part of the Israeli military offensive. We run all sorts of risks trying to get that baby food through to those mothers who cannot feed their children right now because they're malnourished.
It's pure evil, isn't it? It's almost comically evil. The idea you have 5 trucks and even they're not getting through and they have baby food, withholding baby food. And then you get these lines coming out from the Israeli government and the Zionist lobby. Well, Hamas will steal the baby food. Listen to yourselves. Listen to yourselves with your F-35, stopping the baby food entering the Gaza Strip. The withholding of aid and use of starvation as a weapon of war against the civilian population of Gaza, which, as we know, is a war crime, has occurred alongside the escalation in Israel's aerial bombardment and expanded ground operations. The latter is known as Gideon's Chariot, specifically Operation Gideon's Chariot, a drive to take control of the entire Gaza Strip and force the Palestinian population into a tiny fraction of what was already considered an open-air prison before this latest genocidal war. According to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the, quote, only inevitable outcome will be the desire of Gazans to emigrate outside of the Gaza Strip. In other words, ethnic cleansing by voluntary means. Last night was especially deadly as Israeli forces continued to bomb Gaza. More than 70 Palestinians have been killed since midnight. So that's less than 24 hours, including 22 children. And in a 30-minute period, at least 38 people were killed. Just staggering numbers every single day. Every single day. In the comments today, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said this.
I find this deeply painful as a lifelong friend of Israel and a believer in the values that were expressed in its Declaration of Independence. As the Prime Minister and fellow leaders said yesterday, we cannot stand by in the face of this new deterioration. It is incompatible with the principles that underpin our bilateral relationship. Rejected by members across this House, and frankly, it's an affront to the values of the British people. Therefore, today, I'm announcing that we have suspended negotiations with this Israeli government on a new free trade agreement. We will be reviewing cooperation with them under the 2030 bilateral roadmap. The Netanyahu's government's actions have made this necessary, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East, is summoning the Israeli ambassador to the Foreign Office to convey this message. I say now to the people of Israel, I want a strong friendship with you based on shared values, with flourishing ties between our people and societies. We are unwavering in our commitment to your security and to your future, to countering the very real threat from Iran, the scourge of terrorism, and the evils of antisemitism. But the conduct of the war in Gaza is damaging our relationship with your government. Yeah. And as the Prime Minister has said, if Israel pursues this military offensive, as it has threatened, failing to ensure the unhindered provision of aid, we will take further action in response.
It's damaging our relationship. 14,000 kids are facing starvation in the next 48 hours. It's damaging our relationship. At least 60,000 have already died. We've had dozens of people die since midnight in less than 24 hours. It's damaging. The main thing is it's damaging the relationship between our wonderful two countries. There shouldn't even be a trade deal in motion, obviously, between Israel, given they break international law prior to everything in 2023. Prior to that, they're breaking international law repeatedly. They were the number one offenders of all the allies, military allies of the UK. I was going to say except Saudi Arabia. That's not even true. It's not even true, actually. The number one repeat offender of international law, Israel, in the West Bank, but elsewhere as well. And you're talking about British-Israel relations. They've bombed bits of Syria. They've obviously attacked Lebanon. They've bombed bits of Yemen. I think Iraq. You're talking about 5 or 6 countries in the region. You can just blow people up now. But don't worry, none of that matters. The main thing is the British-Israeli relationship. We want that to flourish. We have shared values. What shared values? What shared values? What, the values that meant Israeli terrorists, Zionist terrorists, blew up the King David Hotel in the 1940s, which included dozens of British people in there? Was that shared values? Or when they literally hanged British, I believe they were conscript soldiers, in the Mandate of Palestine, administering that mandate as members of the UK's armed forces, they hanged those 2 men and they booby-trapped their bodies. So when people cut them down, they would blow up and die as well. Is that the shared values? I don't want to share those values. I don't think most people in this country do. Now, in response, Israel's Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Oren Marmorstein, posted this on X. The British mandate ended exactly 77 years ago. External pressure will not divert Israel from its path in defending its existence and security against enemies who seek its destruction. They hate us. They hate us. They think we're schmucks, losers, and they hate us. And yet our entire political class just can't give them money and political support and reconnaissance quickly enough. Kieran, we're seeing what David Lammy says there. Is it beginning to dawn on our political class that maybe they can't be cucks to, the Israeli war machine and the Zionist lobby forever, because it's now getting to the point where even for somebody as politically blinkered as somebody like David Lammy, it's self-evident that in 5-10 years, this man will be remembered for absolutely nothing else than what's being committed while the British Foreign Office and the British government turn a blind eye.
I don't know if it's an attack of conscience. I don't know if it's a sense that time's running out for diplomatic or critical immunity conferred by Britain to Israel. And in any case, it's too little too late. I am all for inviting people into the fold if they have an attack of conscience late in the day. And I think better late than never in most circumstances. In this instance, I'm not willing to offer that kind of benefit of the doubt because I don't think Keir Starmer's government, David Lammy or anyone else, thinks about things through a moral prism in any scenario. I think what they've done is Starmer has found, let's say, a bit of slack in the international diplomatic scene around Macron making critical musings toward Israel, Carney, of course, aligning himself with Macron, and reports, unsubstantiated as far as I'm aware, or at the time of my saying this, as far as I'm aware, unsubstantiated reports that Trump is also, I don't quite know how to put it because he's obviously been so at the forefront of everything that's been going on, but that Trump is losing patience, shall we say, with Netanyahu. Those are unsubstantiated reports. And again, it would bring me, much joy if that were the case, because this has all been funded, sponsored, fueled, profited from by our country and the United States, of course. And lest we forget that it was Keir Starmer who said on LBC that Israel has the right to cut off aid and water and food and electricity. So it's all very well that giving Israel that green light early on in the siege and genocide, and then several 18 months down the line, when Israel is following the logical conclusion of statements made by British prime ministers like that, to say, we disapprove, this is no longer acceptable. As I say, I think it's not something that I put any stock in, and I don't think it will do very much to change Israel's course, frankly, unless America does get involved directly. I'm glad that you mentioned, Aaron, the King David Hotel bombings. And you're right to mention the booby trapping of British soldiers' bodies as well. The most senior member of the Zionist paramilitary that organized the King David Hotel bombing went on to become an Israeli prime minister, Menachem Begin. He went on to become Israel's prime minister in the late 70s and 80s. And he founded the Likud party, which is the party of Benjamin Netanyahu, of course. And one good thing, I think, to anybody who maybe has British family that consider themselves British patriots before everything else, and for that reason align themselves automatically or unthinkingly with Israel, a good thing to say to them is, do you know what Zionists were doing during World War II in British Mandate Palestine? And do you know what Palestinians were doing in British Mandate Palestine? Because in the case of the former, they were murdering British soldiers, killing Lord Moyne, the British lord who was charged with overseeing the last days of the mandate, booby trapping the bodies of British soldiers, as you rightly said, bombing the King David Hotel. And Palestinians, on the other hand, 12,000 of them signed up to join the British army to fight Nazism. So it's just another interesting way that the state of Israel has turned history on its head and managed to corral support from countries that it really ought not to have received so much critical immunity and support from. And the final thing I'll say, because obviously Israel is throwing around the anti-Semitism, or Smotrich is throwing around the anti-Semitism point in regards to the joint statement, which, as we've said, is already far too weak as it is. Nobody takes anti-Semitism less seriously than the state of Israel. Historically, no entity has taken anti-Semitism less seriously than the state of Israel, at least since the founding of the state of Israel. I won't go back into the 1930s. And nobody has weaponized and elasticated the definition of anti-Semitism more than Israel for political ends. And I'll just give one brief example from history, since you mentioned 1948, Aaron. In 1948, there was a typhoid outbreak in some water wells around Jerusalem and a place called Accra in the north. And when this was picked up by Palestinian resistance and Arabs, and Palestinian soldiers were falling ill, they started to accuse, as you would, the Zionist paramilitaries of infecting the wells with typhoid culture. And Abba Eban, who was a prominent figure then, he later went on to become one of the most famous Israeli statespeople of the 60s, 70s, 80s, deputy prime minister at his apex, publicly said this was anti-Semitism, that what the Arab governments and what Palestinians were doing by accusing Zionist paramilitaries of poisoning the wells was anti-Semitism. Several years later, documents were declassified, and lo and behold, Operation Cast Thy Bread, it was called, was a targeted program of infecting Palestinian water wells with typhoid bacteria. So nobody is less serious about anti-Semitism historically than the state of Israel, going right the way back to 1948. It's true that there are hideous anti-Semitic tropes around water poisoning, killing of children, etc., etc. Nonetheless, that is what the state of Israel is doing. That is what it's doing, and it is then proclaiming that any acknowledgement of that reality, which we're seeing in real time, is anti-Semitic. It's the most offensive bilge there is going at a time when there's a genocide being carried out.
Yeah, it's quite ridiculous, frankly. I mean, we're doing the history lesson with Kieran. I mean, I didn't know that actually about the water wells. Also, there was somebody called Volker, we've not mentioned him, and people might be saying, why are you talking about stuff that's 80 years ago? Because that was the genesis of the Israeli state. That was the genesis of the political orthodoxies with which we still live, right? Menachem Begin literally helped create the Likud party, the party of Benjamin Netanyahu. Volker Bernadotte was a Swedish nobleman. He was appointed by the UN to act as a mediator in regards to this, at the time of this crisis. Zionist terrorists shot him. They murdered him. That was the modus operandi then, and it's the modus operandi now. You maintain power through violence. Earlier today in the House of Commons, Coventry South MP Zara Sultana once again confronted Foreign Secretary David Lammy with Britain's continued arms sales to Israel. You literally won't believe what happened next. Take a look at this.
Between October and December 2024, the government approved over £127 million in export licenses to Israel, exceeding the combined total under the Tories for 2020 to 2023. These licenses, granted after the government's so-called temporary suspension, include components for lethal F-35 fighter jets. Jets Israel is now flying at 5 times the usual rate, decimating Gaza. Children are starving, families have been wiped out, hospitals destroyed. Yet the government in court claims that there is no evidence Israel targets civilians. The Foreign Secretary is personally responsible and refuses to ban all arms sales to this genocidal state. So, like many across Britain, I have to ask the Foreign Secretary, how do you sleep at night?
Well, the Honourable Lady has raised figures that I don't recognise. She's raised once again the issue of arms sales to Israel. I banned arms sales that could be used in Gaza. I know that the Honourable Lady is keen on clickbait, but I'm not going to be baited from this dispatch box.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I know she's keen on clickbait, so I'm going to make myself look like an arse on video that can be shared on social media. Well done, David. Passed that exam, didn't you? And by the way, in regards to the specific claim he repudiates, so there's no military technology that we're giving to the Israelis that can be used in Gaza. Complete bullshit. The UK is a big part of the F-35 supply chains to the Israeli Air Force. Besides the actual military hardware, the amount of recon and information the RAF is passing over to the Israeli government is extraordinary. It's more recon that's coming over, reconnaissance that's coming over from the RAF to Tel Aviv and the Israeli Defense Forces. More is coming from the Brits than from the Americans. So the idea that we don't play a highly active role, supportive role of Israel in what they're doing in Gaza is complete nonsense. Based out of the RAF's, base in Cyprus, RAF Akira Tory, I think it is, 45-minute flight to Gaza, a central role from reconnaissance to hardware being exported, to potentially even UK Special Forces being in that part of the world. Of course, we don't know to what extent it can't be verified because they're UK Special Forces. But nevertheless, the idea that we're just, passive spectators in all of this is ridiculous. And the way that he tries to discredit Zara Sultana there by sort of going on, how do you sleep at night? Oh my God, don't go too far. 16,000 children have died. No big deal. Please don't get personal asking how I sleep at night. Well, you actually could do a lot more, right? You could be behaving like the Norwegians, for instance. The UK is a major player in many regards. It's on the UN Security Council, nuclear weapons. Like I say, the IDF's been reliant to some extent on Royal Air Force recon. You could do quite a lot of leverage. But don't ask me how I sleep at night, please. My goodness, how dare you. In case you missed it, Health Secretary Wes Streeting mutters, so cheap, in response to Sultana's point there and her question. So cheap. It's all so cheap. As if, again, who cares? Is that really the point here, Wes? 16,000 kids are killed with support from the RAF. A cheap comment because you can't sleep at night? Kieran, these people, I know they must see the same images that you and I see and all the people that watch and listen. They all see the same images, right? Of kids that are emaciated, of newborn children that, don't get access to ICUs and they die within hours or days of being born. The most incredible tragedy imaginable. I don't want to go overboard with it because it's deeply depressing and miserable, frankly. We've all seen those images. And yet, David Lammy and Wes Streeting seem to think that a question about whether or not the Foreign Secretary gets enough sleep is, you You're going too far there.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is why it's utterly impossible to take any of their comments seriously. It's utterly impossible to take any kind of... I'm sure, I want to believe that Mark Carney is a more serious politician than Keir Starmer. And I suspect on some levels he is. But this is why it's impossible to take this government at all seriously about this. And this is why I say, Keir Starmer, along with a cacophony of other international leaders, gave Israel carte blanche, essentially. Gave them the green light to carry this kind of thing out. And David Lammy is obviously his most complicit member of government in that as foreign secretary. And again, David Lammy saying, this is I'm going to call it pearl clutching, really, at this stage. Pearl clutching, while still going to Israel, still having his pictures with Hotovely and others, far-right lunatics who are passionately cheering on the genocide, still having Israeli officials come to Britain and, stating that they have diplomatic and legal immunity as long as they're here. And then standing in front of Parliament as if we haven't all seen those things happen. I mean, it's amazing that he doesn't realise that we can see him when he's doing those things. So, yes, I'm glad that we've selected that clip to show because it perfectly undermines everything grandiose that David Lammy attempted to say earlier on in the piece. And it shows the unseriousness and the political game playing, ongoing, while they claim to also be trying to deal with or, annoyed at Israel about a starvation exercise, an extinction-level event in Gaza, which they themselves have helped cheer on. All I can say, Aaron, is I said it, I think, last week on the show. These people inhabit a different moral universe to you and I. And I don't, it's difficult to understand what's going through their heads when they see the images that you've been talking about.
Before we go on to our next story, legacy media and our own government have been incredibly slow to speak the truth about what Israel is doing to Palestinians in Gaza. And that's because our elites in the media, as well as at Westminster, prefer to ignore inconvenient truths like an ally committing a genocide. But at Novara Media, our journalism is based on facts, not vibes, not alliances, and not what's convenient, who in and who out. Not friends and foes. We want to curry favour with you, so we won't say it, we will say it. That all means we've been able to say what's true right from the start of Israel's assault on Gaza, while the mainstream media haven't. And that's why you should support Novara Media from as little as £1 hour's wage a month. Even if you can't afford that, it's fine. Do £1 a month. Because we can't do our work without you. If you want to help us grow, go to novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. There are some people in our media environment in this country saying that nobody is starving in Gaza. I like to think every single penny and pound you give to us and give to other organizations that are pushing a different kind of message makes those idiots, those morons who are spreading lies, increasingly irrelevant. Help us. Go to novaramedia.com/support. They're the oldest political party in the Western world and one of the most successful. But could the Conservative Party of Great Britain and Northern Ireland be facing the end? Last July, they recorded their worst result in a general election for 200 years, winning just 23.7% of the popular vote and losing 2/3 of their seats. And then there were, of course, those local elections earlier this month when the Tories were firmly dislodged as the main party of the right by Nigel Farage's Reform UK. But what if that was just the beginning? And what if things were about to get much, much worse? Well, a new poll published today by YouGov would indicate that is precisely what is happening. As you can see, Reform are way out in front, that's according to YouGov anyway, on 29%, with Labour in second on 22%. Then you've got the Liberal Democrats in third with 17%, and the Tories, meanwhile, well, they're in fourth on 16%. The Greens, fifth with 10%. That is the Tories' lowest ever vote share with YouGov, and the first time they've been in fourth place since June 2019, shortly before Theresa May was replaced as leader by Boris Johnson. In terms of seats, Stats for Lefties posted this image on X showing Reform just getting into majority territory. As you can see there, they've converted those numbers from YouGov into a model showing the allocation of the 650 seats at Westminster. Reform on 352. Sorry, I said just short. That's not quite true. I must have seen a different projection. They are just over with regards to a majority. Reform on 352, Labour on 100, the Lib Dems on 87, SNP on 46, the Tories on 19. Quite amusing that one of those is in Scotland and one is in Wales. But there you go, down 102 seats. The Greens almost doubling the number of seats on 7, Plaid on 6. I saw polling elsewhere that had Plaid on 8, I think. But anyway, Plaid and the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, of course, big winners from the left and centre left. Labour, the big losers, first past the post, really helping Reform. And just look at that map for a second, just keep an eye on that. The southwest of England is so orange. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And then, the further east you go, it's just it's all Reform. It's all Reform with a handful of exceptions. So London and the northwest, Greater Manchester, Labour, a little bit of South Wales too. The west and southwest Lib Dem. Basically, the rest of England Reform. Utterly extraordinary to see. But it's actually when you dig a little deeper that the data gets really interesting. Even more interesting than that image you just saw. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, Labour are now third behind the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party. You can see that mapped out over the course of the last 5.5 months. The Lib Dems there on 27. I think the Greens were on 26. Labour on 20%. The Tories and Reform around the same, 12, 11%. And that other green thing, you might think, well, that's the green thing because it's green. No, that's Plaid Cymru. That's the Welsh nationalists. They're now polling at 4% nationally amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. I find that quite remarkable given Wales is a country of, 3.5 million people. But obviously, amongst that age cohort, they're doing very well, particularly in Wales, where, of course, they are standing for election. Also worth noting that, according to this, Gen Z don't all support Reform. There's been this huge meme recently about young people being really into Reform. Well, they're not. As recently as 18 months ago, 51% of over 65s backed the Tory party. Today, the figure is less than half that. So they've got nobody who's young. They're hemorrhaging people who are older. They're in a spot of bother. In the north of England, the Conservatives, meanwhile, are on just 13%. In the Midlands, they're on 17%. And in Scotland and Wales, they're on 9%. This is really bad. Speaking to Huffington Post, a Reform spokesperson said this: "We don't usually comment on a minor party. However, this is the end of the Conservative Party. It's quite clear now that only one party can beat Labour in the next general election, and that's Reform UK." I think that's probably true, isn't it? Pretty indisputable at this point. Kieran, is it over for the Tories? And should Kemi Badenoch go?
I'm going to be a big party pooper and say I don't think it's over for the Tories. I think it's definitely over for the Tories for the next Parliament. I think there's a very good chance that Reform forms the next government, either as a minority government or, heaven forbid, they win a majority. It's also possible, but it doesn't look likely that Labour somehow manages to hang on with a massively reduced majority or whatever, confidence and supply arrangement, whatever it might be. But to the central point, and again, I'm sorry to be so boring. I'd love to sit here and say I think it's, again, existential kind of moment for the Tories. I don't think it is. I think we tend to do this sort of thing when parties are in the doldrums, when they're having a terrible time of it, and they've been in power for 14 years prior. And some people are comparing this to, we were talking about it before, Aaron, some people are comparing this to the Liberals, the Liberal Party, the predecessor of the Lib Dems in the 1920s. I think they left power in 22, possibly 24. In any case, they never came back to power again, apart from in their successor form in the coalition in 2010. But I mean, the Liberals suffered a lot because of World War One, and there wasn't an election, I think, from 1916 to 24. Sorry to do history again, but so I think the parallels are a little bit oversold on that, and so I think reform will form the next government, possibly. I mean, I'm really, really terrified of that prospect, but I think it might well happen. But I think that again, this is just prediction, really, obviously conjecture. I think that they will be a single parliament party. I don't think reform will be able to deliver anything like the kind of things that they're promising they'll deliver. They certainly won't deliver a happier, more prosperous, more inclusive, a more inclusive communal Britain, which I think is part of their programme. We usually associate those kind of words with, multiculturalism, but I think they want a kind of communal Britain of sorts. It's just one that excludes a lot of people. I don't think they'll be able to deliver that. I think they're a party made up of, people who are very, very pro-free market, but say that they're not. So they won't be able to deliver that. And I can imagine that in that vacuum, to my mind, an inevitable vacuum, in 2033 or whatever it is, it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. And I would argue quite probable that a slick Tory will come through the ranks and say that they are the answer to the problems. They would have been out of power for 9 years, a decade by that point. And about Kemi Badenoch, well, she's not a very interesting person, so it's quite difficult to find interesting things to say about her. But she, George Osborne is one of the worst people that's ever lived, in my view. But he was right, actually, the other day when he said that Kemi Badenoch is the crystallization, the kind of embodiment of the culture wars running through the Tory party and precious little else. So, and I think the Tories went through so many permutations in power over 14 years. They drove the country to the edge of the precipice with austerity, and we're still there, obviously, and then as things got worse and worse, and as they had less and less to offer the public, they turned more and more, they pivoted strategically more and more towards culture wars in the hope of, stemming the tide towards reform and revitalizing themselves by throwing the most vulnerable people in British society under the bus. That was their tack, basically. And I think Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, particularly, are embodiments of that. It's very satisfying. Don't get me wrong. It's very satisfying to see them chasing their tails like this. But I suspect, unfortunately, they will come back.
I mean, it's interesting, wasn't it? Because, the Liberals hung on. The Liberals died a century ago, but they hung on. There's a Liberal Democrat Party. They merged with the SDP in the 1980s. They're in government in 2010. So they don't die. But I mean, as a credible party that can form a government, are the Conservatives over? And you're right. I mean, can we really see past 2033? I don't think so. I just think I don't meet Tories anymore. I don't think they actually exist. By which I mean law and order, king and country, family, bourgeois, socially conservative on some things, socially liberal on others. They don't exist, right? Some of those things, those guys vote for the Lib Dems, and others, they're going to reform. I just think that as a personality type, as a voter constituency, it just doesn't exist. And since Thatcher, and then of course with Cameron and Boris, etc., they had to build a coalition which encompassed voters that may be Lib Dem curious, or even Green curious, by the way, Reform, UKIP. And they've had to stretch and stretch and stretch, precisely because I think the natural constituency is kind of dead. It's been dead for a very long time. And I do kind of think they're over. They may reinvent themselves, but I think it's going to have to be a very radical reinvention. Very radical. It's not going to be just a new leader and some new policies and some new social media stuff and we're back. I think it would have to be very radical because those people now who would have voted Tory 25 years ago, they have two parties, Reform and the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems, by the way, in that YouGov polling, doing really well. If you're an ambitious young person who is kind of on the centre-right, Why wouldn't you join the Lib Dems? Right? The Tories are going to lose 100 seats. The Lib Dems are going to probably pick up seats. They're going to pick up council seats. If you want to stand in public office and win and make a difference, you join the Lib Dems. So I just don't see that conveyor belt. I could be wrong, but I think the big money and the media attention goes to Reform. And I think lots of younger activists who are not left-wing go to Reform and the Lib Dems. I just don't see how, as a party, it reproduces itself. I could be wrong. And I think first past the post is a really, really big deal here, right? It means that you can get a lot of stuff really badly wrong for a really long time and survive. But once you fall past a certain threshold, it's very hard to come back again. It should be said that poll also makes for very grim reading for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. In Wales, a party heartland for a century, Plaid Cymru, and this is crazy, I don't think this is correct, frankly, it's just one poll. Plaid Cymru are on 30%, while Labour are on just 17%. Meanwhile, in Scotland, Labour are neck and neck with Reform. And this is the most fascinating one. I think I've already said it. Labour are third among 18 to 24-year-olds. Third. They were getting 50% supermajorities of that demographic with Corbyn in the early years under Starmer. No more. No more. The Lib Dems on 27%, the Greens on 26%, and Labour on 20%. Lucy Connolly, the wife of a Tory councillor in Northamptonshire who went to prison for tweeting about asylum seekers being burned alive in hotels, has had her appeal dismissed. On the day of the Southport attacks last summer, when 3 young girls were brutally killed in a knife attack on a Taylor Swift-themed dance party, Connolly shared this post on X. Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the fucking hotels, full of the bastards for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it. As viewers will remember, misinformation shared on social media about the Southport attackers' nationality and immigration status contributed to rioting and disorder right across the UK. Connolly pled guilty to inciting racial hatred in October last year and was sentenced to 31 months in prison. She also apologised for acting on, quote, false and malicious information. Today, the appeal judge in Connolly's case ruled that there was, quote, no arguable basis that her original sentence was manifestly excessive. But some media pundits are vocally disagreeing. Here's Emma Trimble on GB News.
I think that the treatment of Lucy Connolly is vindictive scapegoating of the worst kind. I think this will turn out to be one of the great legal historical injustices of our time. And honestly, I think that the establishment is trying to wash itself clean by piling all of its sins onto her back and is actually only showing itself to be completely filthy.
I mean, I have to disagree in regards to miscarriages of justice. There's a lot, right? You can think about the Guildford 4, the Maguire 7, the Birmingham 6. Huge miscarriages of justice. There was a gentleman who's just been let out of prison. I think he was in there for 35 years. Last week, this is somebody who has pled guilty to an offence, and then I think they've had a really, really punitive sentence, but they did plead guilty to a piece of legislation which has been on the statute book since 1986. It's not a new law. We'll talk about that all more in a moment. Rupert Lowe, who now sits as the independent MP for Great Yarmouth after his falling out with Nigel Farage and Reform UK, has taken up Connolly's case as well. Lowe has written to the Justice Secretary today calling for Connolly's release and shared this video on X.
I've just heard the news that Lucy Connolly is not going to be released from prison. This seems to be an extraordinary decision. A young mother with young children, with a family, being held in custody for an ill-advised tweet, which she deleted. So my view is, when is the legal system going to be driven by common sense? When is it going to look at logic? And when is it going to release Lucy Connolly?
And Turning Point USA co-founder Charlie Kirk is keen to bring the might of the US government down on the side of Lucy Connolly.
I'm going to try to get the U.S. State Department involved. I don't know if, what their bandwidth is here, but I'm sorry. Again, I'm speaking as a citizen, not as a U.S. government. I just want to be very clear. Is this a way that a liberal democracy and an ally of the United States acts? Just to be clear, what she said would not be any prison time in America.
She pled guilty. She pled guilty, okay? She pled guilty. Is this how this regime, they're clamping down on protest and dissent? She pled guilty. You can say it was stupid. She did it. Kieran, before I go to you, I want to talk about the specific legislation being used here. I think this is really important, actually, because it's quite useful, right? It's Section 19 of the 1986 Public Order Act, 1986, Margaret Thatcher. This is not some quote-unquote woke left-wing law. I'll read this out. Publishing or distributing written material. 1. A person who publishes or distributes written material which is threatening, abusive, or insulting is guilty of an offence if he, she intends thereby to stir up racial hatred, or B, having regard to all the circumstances, racial hatred is likely to be stirred up thereby. You read that, think it's kind of open and shut. Anyway, 2. In proceedings for an offence under this section, it is a defence for an accused who is not shown to have intended to stir up racial hatred to prove that he, she was not aware of the content of the material and did not suspect and had no reason to suspect that it was threatening, abusive, or insulting. There's your defence. She didn't use it, though, because she pled guilty. 3 references in this part to the publication or distribution of written material are to its publication or distribution to the public or a section of the public. She tweeted it, okay? Kieran, what'd you make of this?
Well, I think the two most interesting things for us and for anybody watching this, beyond people who know her, care about her plight, etc., is that, first of all, the internet seems to be creating a lot of these kinds of folk heroes, and it kind of skirts close to the boundaries of lawfare and claims around lawfare and the use of the law to achieve political ends, essentially. So a bending usage of the law in a partial manner. And of course, Tommy Robinson, very different situation, but also not that different, seems to fall into the same kind of digital folk hero category. And regardless of the sort of veracities, the truth in any of these situations, things seem to travel very quickly, particularly across the Atlantic. But there's this international kind of alt-right, far-right network of people, constellation of individuals and organizations and so on, that pluck these kind of seemingly obscure English legal cases and make them big folk tales in America, and they all get, regardless of the differences in the cases, put on the front lines of a supposed battle for free speech. And I'm not in a position to litigate whether she deserved the full sentence she got or whether she deserved a lot more. Obviously, what she said is revolting. And the law is the law in this country. Often it's an arse, to paraphrase Dickens, but she pleaded guilty, as you said, Aaron. So the free speech stuff is interesting as well, right? I mean, I've noticed that Toby Young has been, of the so-called Free Speech Union, has been very involved in this case, as he would, of course. But Toby Young has had virtually nothing to do with Palestine and to do with, police cracking down on pro-Palestinian demonstrators' right to demonstrate and sloganeering and messages around that. And of course, in the United States, it's even more insidious than it is here. And I might be wrong, but I think the Free Speech Union, so-called, that Toby Young runs, has members in the US. Anybody who really, really cares about free speech, regardless of whether it's free speech in support of the left or in support of the right, would be in the trenches fighting serious tyrannical regression on the law around free speech for Palestine. And Toby Young is nowhere to be seen. I mean, he might say, I heard him say, actually, in the House of Lords the other day, I'm very proud to say we've got 1 or 2 cases around Palestine. It's something that I'm very pro-Israel, but I'd love to see what those were, actually, because he certainly ain't on the front lines with all of the headline free speech stuff around Palestine. That's for sure. But of course, he is on this. And so the reason I say all of that is that actually those guys show their principles to be utterly molded, supposedly absolute principles that overarch left or right. They're very molded in the reflection of their own ideological politics, right? Which is the same thing they're accusing lawfare of being, or the law of doing when it's practicing lawfare. And yeah, digital folk heroes. I suppose they aren't going anywhere. We should prepare to see more of this kind of thing.
Kieran, thanks for joining me tonight. Even though I came very close to losing my voice, it was worth it, I think.
Well, you maintained it against the odds, and it's been a real joy joining you, Aaron. Thank you.
Learned a lot, actually. First half of the show, talking about the history of Israel-Palestine. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.